Okay, I should probably have my own music made for that, but for now, I'm enjoying. It works for me. Hi there, this is Dr. Bird. This is my series of story time, reading biblical stories that have to do with sex, the relationships we call marriage, and some form of physical abuse involving intimate body parts or genitalia. Instead of referring to sexual abuse or sexual assault, I don't like to combine those two concepts because I think the first is a positive thing, and combining them, I think, is a part of some people's confusion about the difference between the two realms. I'm laughing because there's nothing else to do with that. So I have a couple notes to myself about things that came up both from I think they were both in yesterday's. It was either definitely yesterday's and maybe the day before, or both yesterday. I can't remember. So one, I wanted to clarify. Um, Part of what I was trying to get at yesterday in talking about Dina's story is that the narrator says that Shechem rapes her and then he falls in love with her, yada, yada, yada. And then the brothers do this thing and it's awful. Part of what I'm trying to highlight, or what I wasn't saying directly, is that in this story and any other story, I think we are allowed to question whether the narrator is trustworthy. So, for instance, as a really helpful, back-to-back comparison, when we look at Genesis 16, when Abraham goes in, forces himself on Hagar, pretty sure those of us watching this, either live or later, are going to say, yeah, that's rape. But the narrator doesn't call it that. The narrator says he goes into Hagar. It's all okay as far as everyone's concerned. Of course, except for Hagar. So the narrator is not always trustworthy. The narrator often calls things what they are not, right? When we're looking at Genesis 19 and we see that the men of the city are reported to have said, bring them out here so that we may know them. Well, that's one of the most atrocious misrepresentations of what's actually happening, where the narrator telling what the men said, like pretending that it's historical, right? Pretending this actually happened. They don't want to have sex with these two visitors. They want to rape them. This is a misrepresentation of what's actually happening, and it's in scripture. The narrator telling it, the men not understanding the difference between rape and mutual sex, right? I mean, it's awful, right? The stories themselves are not always trustworthy. So yesterday, when we were reading Dina's story, and really the way the men are having exchanges between themselves using Dina's body, right? I was trying to suggest that not only is it possible for a person to rape another person and then fall in love with them, like that's not in the realm of reality, okay? Setting that aside, it's possible that a young woman might have had an affair with Shechem, and it might have been mutual, and her older brothers didn't ask any questions, and they just behaved out of fear of what they feared the most, which says a lot about them and how they might treat someone. I am saying this as a woman with 3 older brothers, and not that all of them would behave that way, but there have been from time to time moments where my very well-meaning and protective brothers didn't ask questions. Okay? And just didn't understand what was going on. So that's where I was coming from with all of that. I am never interested in downplaying physical abuse, ever. Okay? That's not my intention. I'm okay seeing it where it's not being said. Does that make sense? It's not said, it's not named in a lot of places, and I think we should be naming it. This one I find fascinating because it says that's what he did, and I just don't fully buy it. And maybe it is what happened, right? And as someone said in the comments, either way, one person, well, either way, what's being said is you don't get to tap that without purchasing it first. I think that's possible, but I also think there's a really interesting family dynamic thing going on here about siblings and overprotective brothers and their reactionary moves instead of understanding what's going on, which is, I think, this other piece of how we connect to these ancient stories in a learning from their dysfunction kind of a way. Does that make sense? Um, so okay, my hair is all crazy today, and I'm feeling anxious about it for some reason, and that's just so silly. Y'all aren't here to look at my hair. And if you are, just enjoy it, right? Okay, so that was the first thing I wanted to clarify from yesterday. And I really, really, really loved that there were people saying, hey, you don't need to get so worked up over this. Or people were chiming in, on the comments to offer a different thing. I really appreciate it about you all. And for those of you who feel comfortable doing that, and I hope that you hearing me acknowledge and respect those kinds of comments, but also wanting to engage it a little bit more reflectively. I hope you take that as a positive and not as something that I'm trying to shut down. I very much appreciated that. It also helped me clarify what I wasn't being clear about yesterday, right? And ultimately, we don't have to read it the same way. That's the other beautiful thing about it all, right? We can do things with these that we want to do. I just happen to think, as a general starting point, let's just be really honest. So that's where I try to stay. And so that's one thing I needed to clarify. And I appreciated that came out of the comments after the thing posted. So I like that. Okay, the other thing I wanted to clarify is that I realized I had an exchange early on in some of the comments, and I never kind of came back and did this publicly, if you will. So if I ever use the word the label feminist to refer to myself, I mean that in a very complex way. I am not just thinking male female, partly because I don't think of humanity in a binary. Um, I also understand and respect the realities of trans lives, and this sense of I have a body that people look at and see a female, but I'm actually a male. And I get that that is a thing in the midst of this human expression that goes beyond just simple male female. Like there's a lot of variety. And I also get there's a trans reality in the mix. Okay. Um, so when I say feminist, for me, that means this general sense of I have been a human being on the planet for 50 years now, and I have witnessed a whole lot of different relationships, dynamics, power dynamics in a lot of different settings. I've had a lot of different types of jobs, not just been an academic. I've been, an Uber driver, and I've been a waitress, and I've been at like all kinds of things, and I've watched and I observe a lot. And I care about the injustices that come out of power differentials, and they play out in gendered ways. They play out in political ways, political realms. They play out due to financial differences. So social class, they play out because of the skin color and the plant, like the part of the planet that we were born on and then come into the world and like all the things associated with that. So when I say feminist, it's a shorthand for me for saying I try to be open to all of the pieces that might be on the table in any given situation where there is a power differential and people are being treated unfairly based on all these things that we put onto people because of these labels and because of our social constructions around what it means that you don't have as much money as me, or I don't have as much as you, and what kinds of things I've been through in life because of that, right? And the things I've experienced because of that. Right? I have lived through things and have had to deal with things, for instance, that full-time academics at institutions where they were giving them, benefits and all those normal typical things. Like I've been through situations as a full-time academic that many full-time academics have never had to experience because their institutions weren't failing. I've literally never received, like retirement benefits from an institution except for the community college that I teach for part-time online. Like there, you know what I'm saying? So like my experience, my work experience, my life experience as an evangelist, but a woman and like in the church and leadership and like all the things. Okay. I'm coming from observing from a huge spectrum of experience and watching a bunch of white men in particular in my life experiences tell me what to do and react, and me having internal reactions to that in some really dramatic ways, and having been very fortunate to be able to do some graduate studies to help me understand it all. If you want to know more about where I'm coming from as I specifically read scripture, my dissertation is actually out in print in published form, and so you could even interlibrary loan it potentially if you wanted to. So you can go to Amazon to find it, or you can go to my website and I have it listed there so you can see what it's called. It's Abuse, Power, Fearful Obedience, Reconsidering First Peter's Commands to Wives. I reference this because for those of you who don't know, what you do in a dissertation is you do a history of scholarship, and then the second chapter is usually the method you're going to use. It's called your methodology chapter. And that will tell you, anyone listening to me wants to know more about me and where I'm coming from, that'll tell you what I bring to the table or bring to the text every time I read, the awareness I have about myself, my own identity, my own personal identity as a cis white female, right? Growing up in a Protestant church in the South of the United States, and mostly hetero, like I don't think we're all just one thing. Man, it's mostly hetero, like all of those things come with me. And then my awareness of that, and then all the ways that's kind of blended in with the studies I've done on, literary theory and materialist theory, Marxist, but also materialist, and feminist theories and queer theories, and all of this stuff that I'm trying to bring to my awareness as a human being, that I'm then engaging when I talk to people and when I write and when I read the scripture, and I try to think about what people are doing with this collection we call the Bible, and whatever level of awareness people do or don't have about when they've been told to read it a certain way, and that's in a way that's harmful to them as a human, and because of who they are specifically, but they don't realize that. And so they've been internalizing this like hatred of themselves because they need to belong to this community. And there are lots of social reasons why a person would choose community over themselves, and it's complicated and like blah, 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 right? That's what I mean by feminist. I mean it all. Like everything I've experienced is a part of my feminist lens. Awareness of our differences. It just so happens that I was feminist first, and then I became kind of Marxist, or maybe materialist and post-colonial, and like all these things, and very much have been trying to unpack my own racial privilege for the last 25 years, nearly 30 years, right? Aware of that in my language, addressing that in my language, like all of those things. So for me, that's what I mean when I talk about being a feminist. It's not this male female thing, much more complex. Okay. And I am glad again that this came up in a comment that was posted after one of the live sessions. And this gave me a prompt to address what's going on for me, where I'm coming from, and why I use a word that has a lot of different meanings, range of meanings for sure, right? Yeah, I saw someone make a comment here. Psychology is something sorely missing from historical research. I mean, psychology, trauma, like the effects of trauma. I mean, there's so many things. I agree with you, James. There's so many things that are missing. I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to bringing things into the visual because I'm trying to like focus all the time. Anyway, so I hope that helped. Wasn't planning on taking 15 minutes to do that, but anyway, I guess when you get started, you just kind of have to see that one through to the end, don't you? But I also hope it's just very helpful for some of you. And it's probably things that you've already picked up on for many of you, but maybe not. So there's maybe something clarifying in that for you. Okay, so what I wanted to do today, I think I said something about Jacob getting a new name, and the whole thing with Joseph's special robe. It's great stuff. So Israel's renaming, there are two accounts of it, right? There's an Elohist account and a Yahwist account, right? They both suggest that, God renames him. And one is after he wrestles all night in chapter 32, which I just skipped right over because I'm not trying to focus on just Jacob's story. I'm trying to focus on the parts that are problematic for people today in this realm. So the second one is in chapter 35. So let's read that one because it also connects to some things that are related to the topics I've said I want to address here. So let me just be a little bit more clear about what I just said. Chapter 32 is where we get this Jacob contending with his brother Esau, and it starts in verse 22, and it goes through to the end of chapter 32. So that's about 10 verses. And then we have here in chapter 35, starting in verse 9, God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. No longer shall you be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." So who's called Israel? That was it. Moving on. God said to him, "I am God Almighty, El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall spring from you. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you." I'm going to just interrupt myself anytime I need to, just to make it easier. It's just one of the things about the psychological impact and effect of texts, and the way texts and their norms can then affect the way people behave, is that you get things like this line: "The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you." And this is said numerous times, countless times, and people end up reading those times multiple times throughout their lives. And so that people take in and don't even, way beyond the point of any sort of critical reflection on it. It's all about the men, first of all, over and over and over. And I just get really tired of it. Sure, it's a patriarchal society. What did you expect them to say? Nothing different. And that's my point. Let's stop the nonsense of insisting that we have to uphold this ancient worldview that valorizes men to their detriment too. Okay? I think the emphasis on it all being about men is part of the problem, right? Not just for women, but also for the men. I do see it that way. It just makes me cranky that I have to keep reading it over and over. And also, that whole other sidebar on the whole thing. Like, what is this story? What is this narrative? And who is this God who is allegedly speaking to these men in this one particular line of people, right? Abraham and his son Isaac, not his first son Ishmael, and not any of the sons from his third family, right? Just this one son, Isaac, right? He's the only one we get to hear about. His sons, Esau and Jacob. Well, Esau has just been kicked out, except we get an entire chapter of Esau's families and descendants, which I think is interesting because I don't think I was aware it was an entire chapter. Were you aware there's an entire chapter naming the Edomites like lineage? But we don't care about the Edomites. We care about Jacob and his descendants, the Israelites. And we're only hearing about them, and God is only speaking to them, apparently, right? Like, that's worth questioning. That's worth bringing up for, like, challenge and refute. Don't you think? Picking up. "I'll give this land to your offspring after you." Then God went up from him at the place where he had spoken to him. Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering on it and poured oil on it. So Jacob called the place where God had spoken with him Bethel, Beit El, house of God. But that's it. We don't get a whole thing in this version, the Elohist version of Jacob's renaming as Israel. And it still takes a minute or two for the narrator himself to, or herself, himself, to pick up on calling Jacob Israel. And it goes back and forth. It flip-flops a little bit in terms of calling him Jacob, calling him Israel. All right, it's today. I'm not sure that's all that. And they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor. And when she was in her hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not be afraid, for now you will have another son." Again, I get it. It's great news. I just get tired of seeing it said that way, you know? It's great news that you've got another boy. You bring another boy into the world. It's just a little bit frustrating, right? Not, "Oh, don't worry, the child is healthy." "Don't worry, it's a son. You're okay." Come on, people. Do you not think reading this over and over and over and just hearing the names of the male patriarchs, heads of these tribes over and over and over and over and over, you don't think that's actually having an impact on the bajillion people who read these texts and like draw upon these progenitors? It's not having an effect on people to valorize men and prefer male children and to assume that men are going to be the heads of things? Like, of course it does. Of course it does. Language and Symbolic Power, one of the more powerful books I've read by Pierre Bourdieu. Language and symbolic power. It is powerful. Language, text, spoken or written, both. Both, because some of us are visual, some of us are hearing, and some of us are weird combination of both or neither. And I didn't mean weird. I'm sorry. I just mean, I'm becoming aware of all the amazing, ridiculous variety of neural connections going on in human brains. My point is, language is powerful. And when the language is never-endingly male-centered, then so are the communities that read it and embrace it. Okay, back to this. Don't worry, you will have another son. Sorry. She means that, honestly. It makes me want to cry. As her soul was departing, for she died, she named him Ben-Oni, which is son of my sorrow. Oh gosh, that's really crazy looking. But his father called him Benjamin, son of the right hand, which is of blessing or positivity, right? Okay, positive things. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem, had been subsequently renamed Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar. See, he's being called Jacob still. Set up a pillar at her grave. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day, right? Whenever this was written. Israel. So he's Jacob in this verse, and the next verse he's Israel, right? Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. While Israel lived in that land, Reuben, which I believe was his first son, went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. Okay, so that's interesting, right? To call Bilhah a concubine. Well, Zilpah and Bilhah, I think Bilhah did belong to Rachel, right? So technically speaking, again, an enslaved woman who belongs to another human. And so now Rachel's dead. And what does that mean? I don't know. Why? And why is Reuben having sex with one of his moms? He grew up with 4 moms, basically. Why is he having sex with one of them? What is that? I don't want to get into that. I want to highlight it, though, because I don't know what to do with it psychologically. I think that's where we need to go with that. Some sort of psychological issue that Reuben has. And many of the men in these stories seem to have that issue. At least one of David's sons, right, has sex with all of David's women at one point. So don't talk to me about, I mean, let's. I'm afraid this might be taken out of context. Um, we see some people in church communities, leaders in church communities, having some serious unethical and abusive relationships, involving sexual encounters, abusing the power of their position, or just having affairs. And one could question the reciprocity in those when there's a person in power over someone who is, like in their tribe or whatever, in their power, in their oversight or whatever, all kinds of things. We're seeing some conversations about this inappropriate behaviors, right? And it's really interesting to me because part of me wants to say, well, what did you expect? All of these men are just being led by that part of their body. Like, a lot of these men are, not all of them. That's not true. That's not fair. Not all of them. But the ones we're asked to focus on tend to. They're bringing it to our attention over and over again that a lot of these men really have a hard time controlling themselves. Like, it is a thing to think about, don't you think? I mean, when people made that whole big deal about David, maybe I shouldn't get into that, but when they talk about David, man after God's heart and all this stuff, yeah, and David raped somebody, and then the part that was a problem wasn't that he raped her, but that he killed her man in order to take her. Like, it wasn't a problem that he and then Bathsheba has to suffer for his issues. I made a post on Facebook yesterday. This is a total random. I don't know why. I didn't think I'd ever do this, but maybe because it's the 20th and I've been doing this every day and this is a new thing for me. And I'm just, anyway, I was at a swim meet last night, summertime swim meet, nothing major. And the pool I was at, where we were racing, it was a new pool to me. I hadn't seen it before. And they had the men's and women's locker rooms, or bathrooms. And and their theme, for the pool was something about boats or whatever. And so I just think this stuff is funny. They had an anchor over the door for the men, and the steering, the wheel that steers the ship was the symbol over the women's. Anyway, I just found it humorous. So I post that kind of stuff on Facebook. I don't use Facebook to convince people of stuff. I use Facebook to raise awareness. And I think that kind of stuff is really funny stuff. Okay. That's the way I think. And that's the way I go about life, is looking through all this stuff. So why is Reuben having sex with his father's woman? And why are they calling Bilhah a concubine now? Right. And why, and did she actually change status just because Rachel died? Or are we just being a little nicer now, calling her a concubine instead of just an enslaved person, a maid? I don't know. I don't really care. I just want to note that it's in here, and someone thought it was important to note. And Israel, he's being called Israel here, heard of it. And then the very next verse, now the sons of Jacob were 12. So we've got some confusion around the whole renaming thing, but it's a thing that does eventually take root. Fair, right? I'm not trying to make a big deal of the fact that it took a minute or two for everybody to figure it all out. So I'm just going to read through a little bit more, and then we're going to jump over to Joseph's coat. Now the sons of Jacob, back to Jacob, were 12. The sons of Leah. Okay, so at least they've named the women who bring these people into the world, right? Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. It was Reuben's attempt, having sex with his woman, a way to show that he's going to overthrow his father, right? We could get into all of that. I don't need to, but I get that it's meaningful in a lot of possible ways. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid. I didn't look up what that word is in the Hebrew. I don't know if it's servant, slave, or if it's a different word for maiden. But she belongs to Rachel, so she's property. So she's an enslaved person in some way, right? So the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's enslaved person, Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Padan Aram. Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had resided as aliens. Not Abraham, Isaac, their women and all of their children, but Abraham and Isaac. It's a shorthand for referring to all of the people. We're going to refer to the male patriarch, head of the family, as a way to refer to everybody. It's called a synecdoche, by the way. One part stands for the whole. And it happens over and over and over again, so that people that are in these traditions don't even notice it or pay attention. Now, the days of Isaac were 180 years. We could get into the fact that this is a direct challenge to earlier claims about the length of people's lives. I don't want to get into that. Just wanted to point it out. And Isaac breathed his last. He died, was gathered to his people, old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. And then the next chapter, chapter 36, is full of Esau's descendants, who are now referred to as Edomites. Fascinating, because I never noticed that. Okay. I'm going to pause here to see if there's not masters swimming. I wish. I'm not. It's just summertime, and I might get up to masters at some day, but I'm dealing with some chronic fatigue. So masters level is just a little bit too much for me right now, but I would love it if I could someday. Isaac was insane. Some of you are fun. Okay. Yeah, isn't having sex with your father's counterpart one of those types of sex that's outlawed in one of these books? Yes, it is. But we haven't gotten those laws yet. So it's okay. He doesn't need to be ashamed of that, because those laws are given to Moses a few generations later. And actually, your father's concubine isn't a problem. It's your father's women. So this is one of the interesting ways why what they're being called actually matters, but doesn't really at all to me, but it matters, because here she's being called a concubine. Nobody says you can't sleep with your dad's concubine. You just can't sleep with your dad's woman. And concubines are just there for sex. So, I mean, in this case, although when it's a pharaoh or a man in great position of power, the concubinages are there. They're there for sex for him, but it's as much a political statement and connection between two groups of people as it is about sex. But for him, there's this. She wasn't. I mean, she came from his father-in-law, so like that's not a thing. Political thing, right? We didn't have any concubines. We just had cucumber with porcupine. Yes. Well, we share these freely. You guys are funny. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's see. I'm not sure so some of these are very important comments, and out of context or out of the flow of when you were in response to what, it can be confusing. So but I see some important comments in the okay. So thank you for being here. I appreciate that. I want to come over here to chapter 37 and just talk about this very briefly with you, about this robe that Jacob gives to his favorite son, Joseph. So this is where I just really wish I could hear all of your voice, like that we were in a Zoom session so we could actually just have a discussion. I really wish I could do that, because I love talking about these things, having a conversation instead of just talking at you. But for now, this is what we have to work with. So Jacob, the start of chapter 37, then Jacob settled in the land, still being called Jacob, where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. Again, we're just all talking about fathers and sons and not the entire retinue that goes with them, right? This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph. I mean, it's funny to me because I can make funny observations about it now. I didn't used to be able to. But you just said this is the story of the family of Jacob, and then you start with Joseph, who's like one of the youngest in the group. Whatever. Joseph, being 17 years old. I'd like everyone to pause and think about what you were like at 17. Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like you to think about the most flamboyant, delightful, perhaps slightly effeminate, and I don't say that as a slur or demeaning at all, right? I'm thinking of these young men I know that I wasn't aware were gay men, but or I wasn't aware of all the diversity, Once you think about a 17-year-old male who likes to wear flamboyant clothes, once you think about that person, Because that's Joseph, right? Because his dad gives him a robe that he wears all over the place. And it's not really a robe. That's what we want to talk about. Let's keep going. Okay. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's women. And my translation says wives. And this is a very important detail because just a few verses ago, she was a concubine and now she's a wife. Really? Really? Okay. He was a helper to the sons, to his half brothers. That's what he's saying here. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Oh boy, what a jerk, right? What is he snitching? Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children because he was the son of his old age. Okay, we're not gonna challenge that because we understand that as much as parents love all of their children, they actually often have favorites. That's just a reality. Let's just be okay with that, right? It's nothing personal. Even though it's entirely personal, it actually isn't. It's just the way life is, right? Okay. Because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves. Okay. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. All right, let's go back to the robe. So I'm reading the New Revised Standard Version, and the footnote here says traditional rendering here is a long robe with sleeves, and then compare with the Greek, and the Greek it would be translated a coat of many colors. And then the final comment here is the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. Well, I actually, if you go look up the NRSV updated edition, I do think they've changed their translation, and I cannot remember what it is. I think they may. I'm sorry, but I don't want to misrepresent. But I know they updated it. I just can't remember which way. I think the way they updated it, if I'm not wrong, I believe the way they updated it is to change the other two references where katonet pasim is what's being used in the Hebrew here to refer to whatever this thing is he's wearing. A long robe with sleeves, this katonet pasim, which is used to refer to Tamar's dress that she rips, she tears as a form of mourning after her half-brother rapes her. So the only other time this is used in the Hebrew Bible, it's used elsewhere, but the only other time it's used in ancient Near Eastern context, but the only other time it's used in the Hebrew Bible is to refer to a dress that a daughter of a king wears. And when it used to be that when it's referring to Tamar and the dress that a daughter of a king wears, they had no problem translating it, the dress that the daughter of a king wears. But when it's being used now to talk about a clothing that a son of a not quite king wears, we don't know what it means. I don't know what it means. What could it possibly mean? It means the same thing that it means over here for Tamar. It's just that, oh my word, Jacob is radically welcoming and inclusive is what that says to me. And he gets that his son wants to wear a dress and he's okay with it. In fact, he gives him whatever dress he wants to wear, right? This beautiful dress. And he wears it all over the place. And I love it. Who'd have thought that Jacob would turn out to be welcoming of a son who wants to wear dresses? Are we supposed to take something from that about who Jacob himself was? And wasn't able to be fully? This is where I'm also going to mention, again, my friend Peterson Toscano's video called Transfigurations, Transgressing Gender in the Bible. You can get it. I think I didn't double check. You used to be able to get it on Amazon Prime, but you can get access to it through the website that produced it. Just do Peterson Toscano Transfigurations, and you can find it. He does a really delightful reading of Jacob and Joseph through this lens. Now, you don't have to agree with me on what I've just suggested, but in terms of who Jacob was and then therefore and who Joseph was, but I think it's a really compelling suggestion. Regardless, I think it is absolutely worth considering that the translation committee's note are absolutely certain what this is, and they are just too uncomfortable by the suggestion that Jacob would give his son a dress, that they would even go and change the reference to it in I'm assuming it's 2 Samuel, um, when Tamar is raped and she rips her clothing, and so they are the translation committee members are so uncomfortable with the suggestion that a biblical father is actually comfortable giving his son a dress that they would change their certainty about that term in reference to Tamar instead of the other way around. This is the extent to which translation committees have power over what people read, have power over what you can then consider to be acceptable because it's right there in your Bible for those who need that. I realize that many people watching this really don't need the Bible to say anything in particular in order for it to be okay in their lives. But for people who do, or if you're coming out of a space where you did need that, it can be incredibly freeing to hear that the people that created Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat were onto something, right? I I mean, a coat of many colors, it's a little bit more flashy than just a coat than just a regular dress or a robe, the Greek interpretation there, and then the Technicolor Dreamcoat, like, we're really going somewhere here, like, I think they were onto something, and I think that's surprisingly a more honest, actually, engagement with what's going on here. And wow, doesn't that change something for you when if you consider, if you just try it on, that Joseph was perhaps a rather effeminate, who cares about his sexuality, but like a flamboyant, effeminate teenager, and his brothers were homophobic in the language we would use to see and understand their discomfort, because if it's happening today, you darn straight it was happening 3,000 years ago, right? If straight dudes feel threatened by what they perceive as a man who might actually want to be with men, they feel like it's contagious. They've been taught to be threatened by that. Like, our culture teaches people that that's a thing, instead of just being comfortable with the fact that my brother that's the way he is, and this is who I am, and we're both fine being who we are. The insecurity of this toxic masculinity is just fascinating, isn't it? Doesn't that just shift a crap ton about this whole story? If you think that, aside from him being a little bit insensitive, to his brothers when he's telling them about the dreams he's had, but my goodness, it reads differently to me if I consider the possibility of what the story is telling me. That Joseph wore a dress around a lot, and his dad loved him the most and was okay with that, and he loved him so much he gave it to him, like the thing that he wore all the time, a dress, a princess dress. That says something to me. That brings in a different dynamic for me as I read the rest of the story of hatred or judgment or fear his older brothers had toward him, selling him to get rid of him, and his choice, right, to be to be a I mean, I don't like using this language, but to be a bigger man than them, right? In terms of he's a bigger human, a better human being, right? In terms of just the love and the forgiveness and the taking them in and providing for them and helping them when they literally left him out to die. So there are all kinds of things, and so I just wanted to talk about that piece of the story. Because we've already gone 45 minutes, and we'll read about the woman, the Pharaoh's wife woman, actually trying to, maybe I should throw this in while we're here. In chapter 39, let's just do this real quick because then I want to move on to the other one tomorrow, to the passage from which we get this ridiculous idea about masturbation and how teenage boys who have been given the line much more than teenage girls that masturbation is a sin comes from Genesis 38. So let's look at very quickly. I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend as much time on this. I just want to raise this point with you. In chapter 39 of Genesis, now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites, so his own cousins, right, who brought him down there. So the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. He made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer from the time that the Pharaoh made Joseph overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and with him there, he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. Now, Joseph was handsome and good looking. I love the fact that those are both in here. I didn't look up what those two words are, but that just makes me think something else. Like, was he fair? Was he more, was he more soft? Maybe a slightly more effeminate, kind of a thing, because that's very good looking, right? What do they mean? Handsome and good looking. And after a time, his master's woman, mine says wife, cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's woman, "Look, with me here, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he's put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am," which is an interesting claim. "Nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his woman." My translation says wife. "How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie with her or to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me!" But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Now, if we were reading this and it was a female and a male telling her to, I'm trying not to be too rude here, right? Telling her to perform fellatio on him, or just, whatever, right? Like, we'd be very clear that this is totally inappropriate. So while he is over all of this stuff, he still reports to the Pharaoh. He's still an outsider, or this isn't fair to him either, right? This is someone trying to force him to have sex, and it's not okay. It's not sexy or cool or fun, right? There's nothing better about this just because it's a woman trying to force a man, right? There's nothing okay about this. So she does all these things. "My husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." So this is the turn of the table, that a woman is being deceitful. I don't. People have had these comments. Well, maybe she's trying to have children, or maybe she's, whatever. I don't know. Doesn't make it okay. It's still not okay with me. It's still an abuse of power. It's still a form of rape, right? This isn't sex when it's not consensual, right? And it's an icky feeling to be working in a place and someone wants something like that from you and you don't want to give it. That's an awful feeling. That makes it hard to get up in the morning and go to work, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, that's Joseph's story. The parts about it I wanted to talk about. Thank you for being here. You don't understand why the atheist community gets so upset about people not agreeing with homosexuality. Um, portraying the issue. Oh, there's some great comments here. Yep. Very interesting comments being made. All right, thank you. This has gone on for longer than I thought it would or intended. Thanks for sticking around. Those of you who are here, I hope that you've gotten something interesting out of this. Perhaps a nugget that you hadn't considered, or someone saying the things you've thought before, and that is encouraging or helpful. We're talking about Genesis 38 tomorrow, and that is one of my I enjoy talking about that story. So for story time about Genesis 38 tomorrow. Thanks for being here or for watching on the replay. I appreciate it. And see you next time.